Schaefer, welcome to the virtual CISO moment. Alex Bates joins us today. He is the Director of Information Security at Sinch. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I appreciate it.
So I would love to hear your career trek, why and how you got started in information security and where you're at today. And I know right before we started recording, I was particularly interested because I think one of your earlier jobs was as a bank teller. So would love to hear how that all played into your
Of,
journey.
of course. Like many people going through school, you have to try to hustle
Mm-hmm.
in that sense. And so I think when I was in San Diego, I had the opportunity to go to San Diego State. Had a blast down there, by the way. Just the weather, the area, everything was great. I had the opportunity to work at Wells Fargo. At that time, I was studying more on the accounting and finance side a little bit, and so from there, actually, was really focused on more of financial transactions, helping the bank and seeing the bank operations develop. The funniest thing is actually when I graduated out of school, I really fell into more of an audit and compliance function. Internal audit, more on the financial transaction side. And that's actually where I first really got my opportunity to see IT audit. What does IT audit mean? The operational side of it, really looking at the policies and procedures that we're working on some of my private equity based portfolio companies there. From there, I would say slowly started to realize that I wasn't going to be a CPA. I wasn't looking to really pursue that path a little bit further. And so IT really started to pop out to me. I think IT auditors, in many ways, a recruiter once said, a staff IT auditor is like a unicorn in many ways, because you're not on the help desk IT service side. You're not necessarily on the security side yet, but you're starting to get a full stack version of what IT looks like. Had the opportunity from there to actually, with a few contract positions, fall into professional services. So I started to really cut my teeth in the advisory side of KPMG. Progressed throughout various projects, gained exposed to Fortune 100 clients on their external Sarbanes-Oxley level controls, that type of work, but also on the internal side, helping them enhance and build up their programs as well, but while still maintaining that consulting background. Throughout the KPMG, believe it or not, was able to really get involved in their emerging technology function, and wrote a white paper, co-wrote a white paper that was published by KPMG called "The Missing Link: Navigating the Risks of Blockchain Technology."
Fascinating.
And so in 2016, blockchain was the buzzword.
Yeah.
Bitcoin was $60 a Bitcoin.
Hey.
And I remember bringing it to some of the partners at KPMG, and also had the opportunity to meet with some of the founders of Ethereum before they had really blown up that platform. And so from that experience, we put out a white paper for executives to say, what should you maybe be aware of? What are some of the risks of this? And again, I think blockchain is still developing into that distributed ledger and that truth function. But it really started to open my eyes to say, where do I want to go with technology within my function? I think as well, Greg, you've probably seen there's so many buzzwords within cybersecurity, information security, IT.
Yeah, just a few.
Yeah. And I think one of the areas that I really enjoyed kind of within that early advisory section was meeting with executives, meeting with small business owners, and saying, what does this mean? What does this mean to my business? What is blockchain? What is Internet of Things? What is cyber? I think cyber is such that term. And so when I left KPMG to EY, I really started to focus on that service delivery of security and where we can maybe go a little bit further within security. At that time, was doing internal audit as well as internal advisory for building cyber programs. Got involved with SOC 2 advisory, and so it was helping those functions out with leading major SOC 2 engagements across some of Ernst & Young's large clients. And also 2018, that was when the GDPR went live. And so what is privacy? What is the goal of privacy, especially from an American perspective? We basically sell every piece of data we can in order to get something for free.
Well, I mean, we think that we're getting something for free, but it's like, you always pay for everything.
Oh, 100%,
Yeah.
100%. And I think the most interesting thing is when you work with Europeans. One of my coworkers at Sinch once told me, Alex, we view our privacy in the same way that you view your First Amendment. And
That's a good way to put it. I like that.
and so it was very, kind of, I guess, right setting for myself on expectations and how serious this is moving forward. And so as I progressed within my career at EY, I was looking at either choosing to go the senior manager route or and really committing to that business, which is a fantastic business. And I recommend any young professional really to look at maybe seeing that, because you see so much. Your breadth of exposure is fantastic. I so from that opportunity, I was about to either commit to the business or pivot and do something else. And I think most of my career being a consultant, I was telling people what to do, but I had never done it. I'd never worked on the other side of it. Resource constraints, budgets, working the day to day and the maintenance. And so when I left EY, I was really looking for one of those opportunities to, you know, show that I could do
Yeah.
it. And so I left there and went to a great company called Intelliquent, which it was a private equity owned telecom network provider for most of the major telecom carriers in the United States. At that same time, that's when Sinch was heavily backed by SoftBank and some of those investors to build a new CPaaS organization. And so CPaaS is that communication platforms as a service. So they were looking for the voice and the messaging and the email considerations. And so been with Sinch and / Intelliquent for almost 4 years and really had a blast doing that as a whole. And so from kind of the start as a bank teller to where I got now, I think they've been very thoughtful considerations for steps that make sense for everyone to look at their career. But I think I have very much a video game mentality for my own career, Greg. And so I always think of, you start at level 1 and what can I do to continue leveling up? And whether that's an experience, whether that's a certification, whether that's just exposure, that's how I've really designed my career.
Well, I think that one of the reasons why I pinged so much on the bank teller thing is because in some ways I was a little bit in reverse there, because I had been in information security for a while and worked mainly in higher education and government. And then I had an opportunity midway through my career to go to corporate as a bank CISO. And I'm like, well, I've never even considered being corporate, let alone working for a bank. But you're right. Sometimes leveling up, I think, requires you to really go outside your comfort zone. It doesn't feel great at first, but you end up like growing so much. Have you experienced that?
I think so. In many ways, I think Richard Branson has always said, if you're offered the job, say you can do it, and then figure out how to do it on the back end. In many ways. And so I'm not sure if you maybe felt that way within information security as well, Greg. There's so many domains. There's so much breadth. And I also feel like there's so much responsibility as well.
Well, I came into InfoSec kicking and screaming because I grew up in IT on the networking side, and networking was sort of like the natural place for security to start. First firewall implemented was like in 98, 99, something like that. And it was all about like trying to get people not to talk to each other eventually. I mean, in the beginning with my career, it was all about getting people to talk, but then it morphed into this thing. But you're right. I mean, you look at information security now as opposed to, that would be like 25 years ago, a completely different field. And I had to chuckle a little bit because you said, what is cyber? And one of the sayings that I use to try to explain to people why I distinguish the difference between information security and cybersecurity. I consider cyber a subset of information security.
I agree.
It's because I don't know how to secure a cyber. I know how to secure information. Information's tangible, but what the heck is a cyber? Now I
Exactly.
understand where they're going with. It's just, and I think that the whole point is that it's just a methodology to say this is the techie side. Cyber, for better or for worse, was adopted as a word to make things sound techy. You have cyber cafes, you have cyber security, you have cyber insurance, and I don't like it, but
No, and to that point as well, it's a buzzword.
it
It's
is a buzzword. Yeah.
and I think in many ways it's also a confusing word for small and medium organizations. What is cyber? Is it a breach? Is it a hack? What is a hack? By the way, and we can probably spend 3 hours diving into what that is as well. But in many ways, I think the biggest role within information security professionals is to try to be liaisons for saying a lot of this is broken down. Cyber as a whole is just it's a tool, it's a person, or it's a process. And if you really
Right.
break down that system to support it, it's just like any other kind of department. Finance, what is accounts receivable? Well, and you break it down that way, it's repeatable in many ways as well. So that's at least one of the torches I try to carry. Is my job is to make you feel a little bit better on this term as a whole.
Now you do work with small and mid-sized businesses too on occasion, right?
I do. From the background of my advisory side, I've taken on Fortune 100 enterprise levels to all the way, small organizations that are regional banks, law firms as a whole. And so working with those, I think one of the areas that people struggle with is what is cyber again, and how do I adapt it to my business? I have an IT person. I have an MSSP or an MSP. Do they do that for me? And I think struggling with one, differentiating your service towards those types of organizations is a little bit hard, because personally, I recommend not trying to be a SOC when I'm a small guy. And a SOC is that security operations center, where eyes on a keyboard for clients as well, because there are those roles in many ways. But trying to again be that advisory function to say, how can we make this less scary for you? And the easiest way I try to do it is to say, what is risk? Let's start with risk, and when you try to talk about strategy there as well, I from one of my predecessors as well, he always said security is like building a castle, and castles look a lot different in many regions,
Mm-hmm.
but you try to look at the foundational elements. What do those castles have? Do they have walls? Do they have turrets? Where do they have the doors? Where do they put the moat? And how does that operate within the functionality that they have? So
Well,
kind of
do you
leading there.
think do you think then that the confusion of what information security as a whole is that maybe considered, one from your perspective, one of the highest or more significant risks for small and mid-sized businesses to information security, and that they really don't understand it?
In many ways, yes. I think it's a two-pronged source. I'd say there's what is information security? How does it apply to my business? And then I think the ignorant factor that many organizations maybe know, but they don't know that they should be. And I think maybe going back to that GDPR aspect, it helped me kind of solidify that, is what is my customer data that I need to protect? And what is
Mm-hmm.
my proprietary data to the organization? Because in many ways, I think, and I hate to really harp on the CIA triad, when you look at confidentiality of data, integrity of data, the third is really going to be that availability of my data. How much do I need that data? Whether you are, and I think looking at some of the most recent breaches with the CDK Global breach,
Mm-hmm.
where there were auto dealers who couldn't access correct pricing. They were completely cut off from MSRP data. They were completely cut off from the ability to get accurate and I'd say available data, where they couldn't sell cars. And so
Well,
Yeah,
And that's really where now you can start like talking a little bit about business continuity there, because
exactly.
I've always had the opinion that if you're going to um, if you're going to properly plan business continuity, you have to plan for continuing operations in the case of all the technology gone. Going back to banking, that was one of the things that we did in banking. Is let's just imagine for a moment that we can't get to core. That what are the tellers going to do? Are the tellers going to shut down completely? Can people not get their money? I mean,
Exactly.
you have to have something in place, particularly when you're talking about a service that um, can impact so many folks there. Now, buying a car, well, maybe I can buy a car tomorrow when things come
Exactly.
back. But getting my check cashed, I kind of need that now. So you focus. That's a huge risk in itself, wouldn't you think?
100% availability and data, and then that business continuity resource as well. And that goes back to backups. That goes
Mhm.
back to the recovery processes as well. Have you worked with your IT team to ever actually recover or restore a backup? You maybe
Or
know
did
that
you
it's
just kind of like do it? You check the box and it's like, oh, I was able to recover one file. Hey, we're good for a year.
exactly.
And
And I think
how often does that happen?
100%. In many ways, I remember doing a tabletop with some of my engineers, and the point was we had never restored a bare metal server from the very beginning. So when you talk about business continuity, it's not just the availability of data, but then you also look at regional considerations. For example, telecom. Every single year, when you do that risk assessment for what's our exposure for this, every single year, storms in the southeast are considerations for a risk, and that
Right.
impact and likelihood change based off the hurricane season. You don't know if you're going to have a Sandy or if you're just going to have a nice little rain in that consideration. And so when you plan for availability, you have to build up your army, build up your castle for the big fight, and you may not end up using it for that time, but you know it's going to come eventually.
And I think that one of the areas where small and mid-sized businesses tend to maybe not be so mature sometimes is understanding that information security is all about managing risk. A lot of businesses, small businesses, they understand risk, particularly startups. They understand about risk take. The risk tolerance is a lot
Sure.
higher. But I often think, and I'd like your opinion on this, I often think that within our field in information security, particularly when it comes to small and mid-sized businesses, I don't think we do a good enough job of paying attention to the needs of small and mid-sized businesses. We seem to always be like, okay, let's just talk about a breach for a second. You've got big company has a breach, and the vector in was small company, a provider. That's so common, right? And so, what do you see always in the news? It's always slamming the big company. Big company's third party risk management program
Exactly.
failed, right? What about the small company? Why can't we focus more on the small company, which is really the root cause? We're always talking about risk management, find the root cause, and help the small businesses understand the risk better. And therefore, we solve the problem organically at the source and maybe reduce these breaches. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you hit it on the head. And you mentioned it a couple minutes ago, third party risk management, introducing that consideration for a small business is so important because again, a lot of these smaller companies, they're people wearing multiple hats,
Oh
and
yeah,
there's a
yeah.
high trust factor within those groups because not only are you a CFO, but you're most likely a COO running the operations of the business. And so there's a lot of areas where you're working with these organizations where these people have been hustling together and they really have that big trust.
Hmm.
When you introduce a third party, that is a huge element that a lot of organizations don't understand. And when you exchange data within that third party, that's the vector where, unless you have strong vetting, unless you have strong um, procurement processes, which sometimes organizations do and sometimes they don't, that's where trust is so hard to give to the unknown. And so when you talk about introducing a third party into your circle or your organization, I think really having that realization of saying, what if that third party fails us? What do we do?
Mhm.
And it's going back to business continuity, but it's also going back to redundant processes as well.
So what can we do though as an industry to help the smaller businesses, just from your view, to help them organically with their information security, so that at every point in the supply chain, we spend a lot of time focusing on the larger businesses, but every point, and I think that one example on how we as an industry are starting to address this is with CMMC in the federal space. The CMMC is going to dictate you have to look at your downstream providers, and those who are downstream understand now that they have to up their security game, because they're starting to be asked all these questions. They're starting to ask questions. What is this NIST 800, 171, and 171A? What does this mean? Because I don't know about you, but a lot of times the small businesses, I sometimes get to paraphrase one client that I've worked with in the past. When I first started working with them, the president said at one point in time, Greg, I've brought you on board to just make this go away, this security stuff. And I'm like, I can't make it go away. It's a part of doing business.
Exactly.
Any ideas about how us as an industry can focus more on the small businesses to elevate them?
100%. And kind of going back to one of the elements that we discussed, it's really raising the flag on what risk means to the business.
Yes.
I think there's a big saying within security: you don't put a $50 lock on a $5 asset. You protect up to the level of the asset. And I think when you talk about risk, and when you talk to organizations, specifically small businesses, they know what keeps them up at night. They know it. Whether it's their sales process, whether it's the products that they're building. The biggest thing is, as a security professional, as a CISO or a vCISO in many ways, Greg, is to say, great, you've thought about this. Now, can you quantify and prioritize that, these risks? And then from those considerations, that helps point out a roadmap or prioritize their investment strategy as well. Because again, a lot of people, going back to that term of cyber is confusing, cyber is scary. It's not. As you said, it's an element of information security. And the function here is really for us to help small businesses understand, how should we build that wall? You don't necessarily need to create Fort Knox for your business.
Right.
Yeah.
We've peppered the board and the C-suite with these color charts and
Yes.
heat maps and all that, which on the and with numbers that mean nothing. It's like I think you hit it exactly, where it's like, we need to be able, as security folks, when we're advising small and mid-sized businesses or working with them, whether it be through a consulting agency or an MSSP or something, to not just tell them, oh, this is a high risk, to try to give them some advice as to what your cost exposure is going to be. Because you can't solve every risk. You can't get rid of risk. Is going to be always there. One of my favorite Star Trek quotes, Captain Kirk, risk is our business. It's like,
yes.
And we have to understand how to manage it. So totally agree. But I have to say, though, that, risk in information security, it can, just trying to manage it can be stressful. I actually got a little stressed out on this call a little bit earlier when you reminded me that Bitcoin at one point in time was $60. And I'm like, oh, if I could just go back in time.
Right. 100%. We wouldn't be having this podcast probably, Greg.
Well, no, I probably still would, because I enjoy doing this. But but maybe I'd have a little bit of a better studio or something. But no, in all seriousness, information security is a very stressful field for practitioners, and particularly since a lot of us, I don't know about you, but I consider myself an A-type personality, and I tend to want to solve every problem. I look at things binary, no pun intended. It's like it's either secure or it isn't. I know that's not the right way to look at it, but that's the way I would like to look at it. I remember one time when I first started for that bank, went out to lunch with the president, like one of the first couple of days I was there, a meet and greet. He's like, well, you've been here a couple of days now, Greg. Are we secure? And I said, yes, sir. And it was the stupidest thing I could have said. It's like, I have no idea if you're secure. And besides, you're probably not. So I ended up going back to him and saying, well, no, let me just explain what I meant from that. And he laughed. He said he understood. But the point being is that we bring ourselves sometimes to a higher standard. We want to make things secure, and we need to do a better job in our field of decompressing from the stress. There's a lot of problems out there. It's a bad time still for the job market. I think it's getting better, but I like to remind people that they need to live full and rounded and balanced lives. So, what's one of the things you do, Alex, to decompress from the stresses of infosec and cyber?
Of course. And for viewers who are not on video, one of the things behind me is a bookshelves with a few mementos from my life, and you'll see lacrosse is a big passion of mine. Not only do I have my son's helmet on the wall, but I have some helmets that I've collected over time. And I think the elements that I really have been focusing on is family and passion, and my own passions that I used to have growing up, kind of closing that loop. I know many colleagues in the past just going and doing Legos as a whole. Really building those beautiful Star Wars sets are some considerations. I tend to be on a little bit more on the physical side because of that athletic upbringing. But my wife is going to kill me that I said this, because it's one of the things that really is a big passion, as well as I like to just play some of the old video games on an old Game Boy from 1996.
Yeah, I have one of those Atari reworks that they did like about 10 or 15 years ago, because I had an Atari 2600 when I was a
Love
kid.
it.
So and on I still have a tube TV, an actual CRT.
I love it.
A small one, but it's like, I hear you. It's like I like to do that too, but I pick it up like every 2 or 3 years. I'm like, well, let me play Space Invaders.
Exactly. Space Invaders, some of the original Legend of Zelda. It's a simple journey, and also in many ways, it's kind of putting your car in cruise control. Sometimes you need the mindless activity to turn that type A, I'd say, mentality off a little bit. You've organized your day to day. Your there's no really 9 to 5 in security, unfortunately, but
no.
Being able to say, I've done the best I can today. I've watched the tower the best I could, and then going and playing a 8-bit video game from the 90s, and just kind of decompressing. And when I used to live in the city in Chicago, so I'd have about 15 minutes on the Brown line headed back to Lincoln Park. That 15 minutes would just help me rewind, and it was that buffer. And so I really encourage people, if you have the luxury of getting that 15-20 minute buffer at the end of the day, to just kind of recap off that, but also zone out. And then if you're like me, I have 3 kids 4 and under, quickly getting back into the fray with those folks as well, and really helping them support their day. So I try the best I can.
You triggered something in me, because you talked about, like, I don't remember exactly how you said it, I'll paraphrase it, but just finding something that you're almost like doing nothing. You're just zoning. And I had to chuckle, because my wife and I were always excited about this. Can probably tell us how old we are. We get excited about Friday nights, not because that we're going to go out to dinner or anything, but because we get to sit and watch On Patrol Live. And that's our decompress. We just, it's like, Cops Live. We just love it. So future plans, I hope not to see you on Patrol Live as part of your future plans, but what you got coming down the road?
Yeah, right now I'm actually doing a few speaking engagements coming up in Telecon down in Austin. I'll be talking about leadership within cybersecurity at that function. And then CypherCon up in Milwaukee in April. I'll also be giving a similar speech there, talking about biasness within leadership and information security as a whole. And so that's just from a personal side. From a continued professional side, doing a lot of great work at Sinch, and also maintaining a few kind of just connections within the information security world. And the goal will be eventually going to be a CISO. That's my mountain to climb, so be similar to you, Greg. Really start to flex some of those muscles, and then really start to develop my mentoring aspect. I think there's so much of this industry that and I think you mentioned as well, the diversity of backgrounds is so complex. I think as much as we can lift other professionals up into roles where they get different experiences and really help them on their own journey. That's the goal, because I'm sure you've seen it many ways, Greg. A lot of people tag you within security based on your experience. Oh, you're an advisor, you're a GRC individual, you're a technical CISO, you started in networking, and I think that is unfortunately such a limiting factor to all of us, because kind of going back to that video game mentality, you can level yourself up, you can supplement yourself with skills, but it's really the value that you bring in your day-to-day to your organization or to your clients, to your small organizations, and that's that value, and people want to hear your perspective based off your experiences more than what you read or how well you translated the OSI model, as well. And so that's my goal, is to really humanize cybersecurity as much as I can.
Well, I tell you, I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I feel the need to mention it again, that one of the main reasons why I just absolutely love doing this is because I get to hear all of these different perspectives and stories, and I realize that over my career, like how siloed in some ways I was with regards to my thoughts and my opinions and my experience and all that. And it's just such a blessing to be able to hear all of these stories. I just love it. It's like I this is a fun thing for me. If I could do this full time, I would probably do it. But I totally agree with you, and wish you the best of luck on your journey.
Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you for having me on. Avid listener, love following you as well. On all your posts on LinkedIn are fabulous. So thank you for the time today, and I appreciate it.
Well, I've had one or two that have bombed, but I appreciate that. Well, I appreciate also you coming on and spending some time with us this morning.
Of course. Thank you, Greg, and thank you all listeners.
Yeah, everybody, stay secure.